Doctors hate both being on the hook for finding customers and dealing with the back end of payments.
There's great clinical care out there, but the connectivity into it, so the ability for consumers to understand all of that stuff is super disjointed.
Is this us building Kaiser on the internet? It's going to be so great.
I will. Thanks for
Hi,
having me.
TJ. That looks like a really nice camera on your shelf.
Yeah, I've used it like twice, but it was fun to buy.
Did you get it in Japan?
No, I got it in
Oh,
America. No.
okay. Give a quick background on, I don't know, one of your more fun investments right now with our good buddy Elliot. Give a minute of the history there, then we'll dive into the.
Yeah. So I started a company called General Medicine with my old co-founder, Elliot Cohen, and our old chief of staff, Ashwin. I think the general theory is that you should be able to shop for healthcare like you shop for everything else. And right now, it's super complicated to understand what your options are, what the best next steps are, how much they cost, what the availability is, like all the kind of complexity that comes along with healthcare. And our big belief is that if consumers had tools and the ability to shop for healthcare like they shop for everything else, that it would both be a better experience. They're more likely to address issues they might have, and ultimately be healthier and sort of consume healthcare in a very different way.
So the interesting double click, right? Because we are at slow small investors to me is that you start getting into the decentralization of healthcare if you really do this well. I guess SKU level healthcare makes a ton of sense, and being able to reroute both for physicians and patients, being able to kind of own your own book, own and provide the services you want. And a lot of the reason it's tricky for doctors to do that is doctors hate running businesses, and doctors hate both being on the hook for finding customers and dealing with the back end of payments. And I think part of the United vision we all have here is like, okay, but if we can actually get into a marketplace model, right, customers will navigate and we can basically recreate the referral mechanism you see in a large healthcare system, right? But for a higher take rate to doctors because we're doing it in an internet marketplace model, like patients pay less, doctors make more. Like we're all agreed like that is the thing to do.
Yeah, part of the insight here is that there's great clinical care out there, but the connectivity into it, so the ability for consumers to understand all of that stuff is super, super disjointed. And so the idea is how do you build on top of this system in a way that is much more consumer oriented, but leaning into offline providers and health systems and other folks that do provide very good care, but are really terrible at building digital experiences.
Do you think I had this thought? The reason healthcare systems actually exist is for both the naivete, ignorance, laziness of doctors and patients. You know what I mean? Which is like one, like doctors don't want to get out of like their mode of practicing to go find patients, provide care, and do the billing, right? They just are like, I want to wake up and be a doctor.
Totally.
But on the other side, patients are like, get that I can like navigate around and probably find something better, cheaper, but like, fuck it, I have Kaiser, I'm just gonna go to them. And like, it's actually both sides have like the same expressed preferences to date or
Yeah, and I
right.
think the other vector that you guys have talked about a bunch, which I think we agree on, is that given the regulatory overlay, independent providers are deeply disadvantaged compared to large health systems, right? They don't have any ability to monetize downstream care that they're referring out, right? So if you look at the average PCP that's part of a large health system, they're generating 2 to 3 times the kind of top line revenue and downstream referral as an independent primary care is. And so they're just deeply disadvantaged given all the complexity around Stark and kickback. And so I think there are other more novel models that would allow for independent providers to remain independent as part of a larger marketplace.
Yeah. Is this how we're building? Is this us building Kaiser on the internet? It's going to be so great. I think the other thing to hit on before we disagree or the thing that's important to me is also we have an issue with primary care actually matters, but in a very like hard to measure way. You know what I mean? Having high quality. I mean, this comes from my own household. My wife was a hospitalist and a primary care provider.
Yeah.
And they actually are the tip of the spear on like cheaper, better outcomes in healthcare, but in a way that is not directly related to like, they're not doing the intervention as a specialist. And so they don't get credit.
Yep.
And two, because they don't capture any of that downstream revenue. Basically, they're like, you build for like $50 for a visit, you get 30 of that. And the answer is like, okay, not only are we not paying doctors enough in general in America, all of a sudden our PCPs are at the bottom of the stack, which means nobody wants to be the PCP at a certain.
We've also inadvertently turned them into these gatekeepers for everything. So a bunch of relatively straightforward, low acuity stuff that should just be spearfished by the consumer ends up sort of being forced to be dealt with by primary care providers. When in reality, if you took that stuff off their plate, you'd give them more bandwidth to do the more complicated stuff and to actually deliver care that's going to move the needle versus sort of forcing them to be gatekeepers to a basic prescription or getting imaging or labs or other stuff where like consumers are like smart enough to just order that stuff and consume it, right?
Okay.
And then and you've got bandwidth from a primary care provider to do more complicated stuff where like the clinical knowledge is actually very useful and there's a lot of utility there.
Okay, this becomes the fun debate amongst TJ and Will on all the shared stuff is don't ever bet on people buying shit differently.
What's the most analogous category that historically you've had no ability to basically purchase in a normal kind of consumer flow? Because you're comparing,
Cars come to mind. I'm trying to think of.
but
Is
cars are already going this way, right? That's basically done, or
no,
at least
I don't know if cars are right. That's actually a good question of like, what was gatekept for expertise, right?
yeah.
That then the power, like the purchasing power was there was a gatekeeper who wasn't just a gatekeeper because like they had the keys, but they had like intellectual power over you of like, I don't know what the fuck to do. You please tell me.
Yeah, I think your best counter argument is most services not constrained to healthcare have not moved to marketplaces. It's been constrained to products, right? So like your general contractor, your plumber, like anything where it's sort of a local, very, I guess it's sort of gatekept. Like it's just not a there's not like a product catalog. That's the stuff that's really it's not just healthcare. It's like anything servicey has had a much harder time co-opting into like a more normal.
Plumbing's actually an interesting one to like use as the straw man or the steel man for the argument of like, I don't really know what I need when I call it. You know what I mean? It's like TJ and Wolf definitely have no idea. It's like my
Yeah,
water is
I know.
leaking,
Most average consumers don't, of course.
but it's like my water doesn't work. You know what I mean? And so like rather than me doing the next level of discovery and saying like, oh, it's actually X problem, I just call someone who comes to my house and then they tell me what intervention I need, right? And then they either provide it in a very opaque way or route me to someone who's a deeper specialist. And I
I
think
mean,
that would
I do think like ChatGPT does change that in plumbing. Like I think like you're taking pictures and figuring out what's going on, and you can get a little bit. You're probably not necessarily going to get to like the definitive answer, but you can sort of hone in on like these are the 2 or 3 things that are probably happening, which I think is pretty comparable to how we think about it. I think like these ChatGPT and other kind of LLMs are going to get you pretty close to the right intervention, but you're still going to need someone to take you like either refer you in, create the order, like take you to that last
yeah, I
kind
guess
of.
then maybe we're more aligned, which is like I think for everyone, all 4 people listening. I mean, it was when it launched.
Scraping the bottom of the barrel on my podcasting tour here.
No, when it launched, the immediate conversation for me was like, "This is rad. I don't think people know what they want." You know what I mean? And so maybe there's a shared ethos here, and we're not disagreeing. Like there will be a layer on top where you go like, you come somewhere and say, "I don't feel good." You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like I guess the expression for the American consumer is like, "I don't feel good," not that I need kidney blood work, right? And maybe that is the pitch is like AI actually becomes the front door for I don't feel good, the same way that you will now pick better on plumbing, and maybe now's the time to run a plumbing marketplace because you can go like, oh, who wants to come in and change right the pressure system in my da 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 da.
I think there's 3 levels here. There's like the folks that like they just know they want to get a lab test. There's folks that know they want to get a full body MRI. They want imaging. Like they know they need a prescription that they've had forever. Like there's stuff where you just literally want the least friction. You know exactly what you want, and you're gonna go procure that thing. I think we served that use case very well. There's a tweener, which we're talking about here, which is like a lot of stuff that's like, hey, I've got this kind of amorphous shoulder pain and I can't figure out like totally what's going on. Like ChatGPT gets you pretty damn close to the right thing, but you still want a provider to like take it from there and figure out how to get you to the next step. And then there are going to be things which I think we also can do very well where the consumer has literally no clue what's going on. Like they've been to 2 or 3 specialists, they've been to their GP, like they're like on this hunt, like this treasure hunt to figure out what the hell is going on. And that's why we have like our own first party medical group that is going to be staffed with folks that can help like really figure that stuff out in a more traditional sense. And so I think all those flows end up, you can kind of get anything you want, but there are going to be kind of different paths you end up having to go down based on where you are in that spectrum.
Did you end up with actual like interesting data from Amazon? Because you guys started trying to provide some healthcare SKUs.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what you're allowed to talk.
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously a lot of this is derivative of the stuff we've been working on for a super long time. But the reason the philosophical reason we got excited about Amazon in the first place is we had this general theory that shopping would solve a bunch of problems in pharmacy specifically. And then the more we kind of pulled on that, the more we thought it actually solves problems well beyond pharmacy. I think probably the most interesting data point from the Amazon experience is the kind of funded versus unfunded, cash versus insurance dynamic we saw in pharmacy, where the average pharmacy, maybe 10, 15% of shares going off benefit to cash, things like GoodRx and other kind of discounts. And the only thing we did at Amazon was show you like apples to apples what the cash price is versus your insurance price and card and checkout, which shouldn't be a particularly novel thing to do, but as of now, it's still relatively novel. And we were running kind of almost half of transactions were going off benefit to cash, which is 3 to 4 times the industry norm. And I think as it relates to this, the most interesting part of that was it was only cheaper at like 20% of the time, right? Which tracks to kind of the offline share, but it was marginal enough that like it was $20 instead of 10, it was 25 instead of 14. And like all of a sudden there's no prior auth and it's not too soon to fill the prescription and it's just like not annoying. And so I think you're gonna see a similar dynamic here where when you actually show like competitive cash rates to what is your insurance out of pocket price, a bunch of the share is just going to go to cash. The consumers are just going to be happier paying cash. The flip side is, I think, if you only do cash, you end up not really being able to serve the breadth of what people's needs are because they're not going to pay cash for a $2,000. They're not going to pay cash for like a specialist visit offline. And so like you end up sort of siloing yourself out if you're not able to show them both. And I think that's pretty novel. Like I don't think anyone's gotten really good at cash and good at showing you insurance.
Yeah, and that goes to my like again, back to people don't want to change how they buy things. It's gonna take a long time till people walk into a healthcare situation ready to like go out of pocket. You know what I mean? And so I think that that's interesting. What's been the reaction from, I mean, you know everybody. What have like the systems and payers and big provider group? Has there been any interesting reaction to general medicine at all, or everyone's just like, ah, cool?
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of inbound from health systems specifically. I think the savvier ones understand what they're good at and have realized that digital is probably not the thing they're going to do themselves or thrive at. And so we've gotten a lot of inbound there. I think figuring out the right timing to do more novel things with health systems is still a little bit up in the air, but I think in the fullness of time, like you can imagine that we're pretty deeply integrated into their scheduling and their referral flow and a bunch of other stuff, and maybe pick up like low acuity stuff that's not that economic or important for them to do, and we're filtering that back out to the network of folks that can do that. So health systems have been interested. There's a lot of obvious pricing dynamics there where you want to be very careful that you're still optimizing for the consumer and not a B2B partner. Interestingly, in this one, compared to like the PillPack work, we're actually pretty aligned with commercial payers because they've done all this work to create these complicated benefit designs to encourage people to get the right level of care, to go to the lowest cost provider, but have done zero work or certainly zero work that's moved the needle on allowing consumers to see that information and make it useful. So there's a lot of interest there, and we're pretty aligned, perfectly aligned.
It's funny you say that to do a little slow portfolio commercial. We backed a company called Pair2 that is in the patient advocacy space.
Yeah, I remember we talked about that one.
Uh, and it's funny because everyone's general reaction is like payers don't want people utilizing programs, right? Like the first order of thinking is like, hey, payers are happy when you don't use their resources. And the answer is like, no, they're actually like, they sit around scheming up like beautiful benefit plans. Like when they cover something and have a code, someone has done a lot of math on the ROI of utilization. Like when that code gets utilized, good things happen. Yeah. They just don't know. Like their expertise is not engagement or driving usage, and that's been really one of the interesting things at Pair2 as we've kind of it started cranking and we had some pushback from. It's like no, the payers actually want because patient advocacy is covered now. And they're like, no, they want you to go do that so that you get all the right care early and they're not stuck with a massive bill on the back end.
Yeah, I mean, well, payers, it's classic healthcare, right? They've done every possible permutation of designing benefits to fit into a system like I'm describing, and then literally nothing to make that system consumable by the consumer.
100%.
I've been spending 15 years inventing mechanisms to try to encourage the behavior I'm describing. And it's like, well, if you just gave consumers the tools to do this, like they'd probably just do it, and you've already done all the hard work. Like, let's just show it to them.
Why can't payers get out? Why can't payers have any consumer facing group to drive utilization of their beautifully designed? Is it an incentive problem?
They're just not wired that way. They're not consumer. They sell to large employers. They're B2B businesses. They're like economic arbiters. They're not consumer folks. And like the smarter ones know that for sure. The behemoths, I think, probably would argue that they will figure it out over time, and they've got their payer portal that the consumers are already use, and I'm just deeply skeptical that they'll ever turn the corner on being.
Thanks for making it through all of that. As always, smash the subscribe button. I think that's what everybody says. And more importantly, let us know if you don't agree. We always love being disagreed with. You can follow me on Twitter at WQuist, Quist, or follow Slow. They retweet most of everything all of us say anyway. So at SLOW. And we'll see you next time.